She does not know who wrote the letter. That is the first thing you need to understand. When this document arrives, carried by hand, pass through at least 2 sets of careful, nervous fingers before it reaches her. There is no name at the top, no greeting from Paul, no signature from Peter, just words. Just the argument, beginning immediately, as if whoever wrote this had no time for pleasantries, as if the situation was too urgent for an introduction. She has been a believer for 15 years. She remembers the early days, the meetings in homes, the breaking of bread, the sense that something had cracked open in the world and light was pouring through. She remembers the first time she heard that Jesus had risen. She remembers what it felt like to believe it. The joy was not quiet, it was not dignified. It was the kind of joy that makes you give things away, that makes you visit prisoners, that makes you stand in a public place and refuse to deny what you know to be true, even when the crowd turns ugly. She has done all of those things. And now it is the year 64, and Rome has burned, and the Emperor Nero has decided that Christians are responsible, and the historian Tacitus, writing decades later in language so precise it has the feeling of a man trying to get the record straight before he loses his nerve, records that believers in this city were arrested, covered in animal skins, and thrown to dogs, crucified, set on fire at night to light Nero's gardens. She knows some of those people. And somewhere in the back of her mind, growing louder every week, is a thought she has not yet said out loud to anyone. A thought that feels like survival and betrayal at the same time. Maybe it is time to go back. Back to the synagogue. Back to the familiar prayers, the familiar calendar, the familiar smell of the Sabbath. Judaism is a religio licita, a religion permitted by Rome. It has legal protection, it has history, it has the Torah and the Psalms, and the temple still standing in Jerusalem. The smoke of the daily sacrifice still rising every morning like it has for 1,000 years. Christianity has none of that. Christianity is new and illegal, and its founder was executed as a criminal, and its people are being burned alive in the gardens of an emperor who thinks this is entertainment. So you understand then, you have to understand why the letter begins the way it does. Not with comfort, not with sympathy, not with a gentle word about how hard things are. It begins with a declaration so large it takes your breath away. In the past, God spoke to our ancestors through the prophets at many times and in many ways. But in these last days, He has spoken to us by His Son, not a prophet, not an angel, not a law carved into stone tablets on a mountain while the people waited at the bottom, terrified of the smoke. A son, the exact hypostasis, the exact stamp, the exact imprint of God's own nature. The Greek word hypostasis is important here. You will hear it again before this video is over, in a completely different place, and when you do, the author's argument will click into place like a key turning in a lock. Hold on to that word, but for now, just feel the weight of the opening line. The author is not easing you in. He is telling you, in the first 3 verses, what the entire letter is about. God has spoken, finally, completely, irreversibly. And the word He has spoken is not a teaching or a text or a tradition. It is a person. And there are 4 words near the end of this letter. 4 words that come after everything the author is about to argue. After all the theology and the history and the great cloud of witnesses that will land differently once you have heard the whole case. We will get to those 4 words. But not yet. This is not a theology textbook. This is not a letter written for comfortable people. This is not a document designed for seminary libraries or study groups that meet in warm rooms with good coffee. This is a letter written to people who were about to give up. And the author, whoever he was, Because, as Origen said in the 3rd century, who wrote the Epistle, in truth God knows, and we still do not. The author knows exactly what is at stake. He is not writing to persuade skeptics. He is writing to hold on to believers, people who already know the story, people who have already paid a price for the story, people who are now asking quietly in the dark whether the price was worth it. That is the question underneath every chapter of Hebrews. Is Jesus worth holding on to when holding on costs you everything? Stay with me, because the answer the author gives is not simple, and it is not cheap, and it will not be resolved in 30 seconds. But it is an answer, and it begins with who Jesus is. Here is what most people miss about this letter. The recipients were not lukewarm Christians who had never really committed. They were not casual believers, Sunday morning attendees, people who had kept one foot in and one foot out from the beginning. The author tells us exactly who they were in chapter 10, and when you read it, the weight of their situation becomes almost unbearable. He writes, "Remember those earlier days after you had received the light, when you endured in a great conflict full of suffering. Sometimes you were publicly exposed to insult and persecution. At other times you stood side by side with those who were so treated. You suffered along with those in prison and joyfully accepted the confiscation of your property, because you knew that you yourselves had better and lasting possessions." Read that again. They had their property confiscated, their homes, their businesses, their savings taken, and they accepted it joyfully, not grimly, not with clenched teeth and white knuckles, joyfully, because they believed with everything in them that what was coming was better than what was lost. That was then. Now it is years later. The joy has not disappeared entirely, but it has changed shape. It is quieter now, more tired. The people who once stood side by side with them in that first wave of persecution, some of them have drifted. Some of them have gone back to the synagogue. Some of them have simply stopped coming to the meetings altogether. And every week the circle gets a little smaller and the question gets a little louder. Was it worth it? The author of Hebrews hears that question. He does not dismiss it. He does not tell them to pray harder or try harder or manufacture a feeling they no longer have. He does something far more difficult and far more loving. He makes a case, a careful, historically rooted, theologically precise case for why Jesus is not just good but better. Better than every alternative they are considering. Better than the angels. Better than Moses. Better than the priesthood. Better than the entire sacrificial system that has been running every morning in the temple in Jerusalem for over 1,000 years. Better, not different, not newer, better. And the first comparison he reaches for is the one that would have stopped his readers cold. Better than angels. You have to understand what angels meant to a first-century Jewish mind. They were not the soft-winged figures on greeting cards. They were the ones who stood at the gate of Eden with flaming swords. They were the ones who appeared to Abraham and to Lot and to Gideon and to Daniel and to Isaiah and to Zechariah. They were the mediators of the law. The book of Acts tells us the law was put in effect through angels, and the letter to the Galatians echoes the same tradition. Angels were the agents of the covenant. They were the ones who stood between the human and the holy. And the author of Hebrews opens his letter by saying, "The Son is greater than all of them." He quotes 7 passages from the Hebrew Scriptures. 7, which in Jewish thought is the number of completeness, and every single one points in the same direction, to the Son who is heir of all things, to the one whom the angels themselves worship, to the one whom God addresses not as a servant but as a son. "You are my son. Today I have become your father." The argument is not gentle. It is decisive. And then, barely 2 chapters in, the first warning arrives. We must pay the most careful attention, therefore, to what we have heard, so that we do not drift away. The word the author uses for drift is a nautical word. It is the word for a boat that has slipped its anchor, not violently, not through a storm, not because the rope was cut, but quietly, gradually, in the night, while no one was watching. The current takes it, the tide moves it. And by morning, it is somewhere the captain never intended, and the harbor is a long way back. That is the danger the author sees in his readers. Not dramatic apostasy, not a public rejection of the faith, not someone standing up in the meeting and announcing they are done. Just drift. Slow, quiet, imperceptible drift. The kind that happens when you stop paying attention. When you miss 1 meeting, then 2, then 5. When the prayers get shorter. When the Bible stays closed a little longer each week. When the fire that once made you give your property away with joy becomes a pilot light you can barely find. He is writing to drifters. And then he turns to Moses. Moses is the hinge point of the letter's first movement, and you need to feel why. For a Jewish Christian, Moses was not simply a historical figure. He was the figure, the one through whom God had spoken definitively, the one who had seen the burning bush, who had stood before Pharaoh, who had received the law on Sinai, who had led an entire nation through a wilderness on nothing but the word of God. If you were going to argue that someone was greater than Moses, you were making the largest possible claim. The author makes it, servant, son. Moses was faithful as a servant in all God's house, but Christ is faithful as the Son over God's house. Both faithful, both honored, both real, but the difference is not a small one. A servant carries out the master's instructions. A son inherits everything the master owns. A servant points to the one who sent him. A son is the one being pointed to. Moses was faithful. Of course he was. The author is not tearing Moses down. He is not asking his readers to abandon everything they were taught in the synagogue, to throw out the Torah, to treat the covenant at Sinai as a mistake. He is asking them to see what Moses himself was pointing at. Moses was a shadow, not a lie, not a mistake, a shadow. And here is where the Jewish philosopher Philo of Alexandria, writing in the generation before Jesus, would have helped the recipients understand the framework immediately. Philo spent his life arguing that earthly things are shadows of heavenly realities. The temple is a shadow of the heavenly dwelling. The priesthood is a shadow of the divine mediation. The law is a shadow of the ultimate righteousness. The author of Hebrews takes that framework and says, the substance has arrived. His name is Jesus. And immediately after making this argument, barely pausing, the author inserts to his warning yet. He quotes Psalm 95. Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. He reaches back to the generation that left Egypt, who saw every miracle, who walked through the Red Sea on dry ground, who ate bread that fell from heaven every morning, and still, in the wilderness, hardened their hearts and turned back. They saw everything, and it was not enough. The implication hangs in the air like smoke. Seeing is not the same as holding on. Witnessing a miracle is not the same as enduring to the end. The generation in the wilderness did not fail because they lacked evidence. They failed because they stopped trusting the one who had given them the evidence. The author looks at his readers and sees the same wilderness, the same exhaustion, the same temptation to turn back toward what is familiar and safe, the same whisper. This is too hard and too long, and the promised land is too far away, and maybe what we left behind was not so bad after all. He does not condemn them for the feeling, but he does not let them stay there. Before we go further, I want to pause for just a moment. because we are about halfway through the argument of Hebrews, and I want to make sure you are tracking what the author is doing. Every comparison he has made, Jesus greater than the angels, Jesus greater than Moses, the warning not to drift, the warning not to harden your hearts, every single one of them is moving in the same direction. He is building a case, not to impress you, not to win a theological debate, but because the people he is writing to are tired, and tired people do not need more emotion. They need a reason. A real reason, built on something solid that holds up when the feeling is gone and the fire is low and the question comes back in the dark. Is Jesus worth holding on to? That is the question underneath every paragraph of this letter. And the author is not done answering it. We are about to move into the deepest part of his argument. The priesthood, the sacrifice, the anchor for the soul. And it is going to require your full attention, because this is where Hebrews becomes unlike anything else in the New Testament. If you want to go even deeper into the full argument of Hebrews, walking through the letter chapter by chapter, passage by passage, there is a full video on this channel that does exactly that. The link is in the description. Watch it after this. It will be worth your time. And if this kind of content, where we take the deep things of Scripture and try to make them clear without making them small, if that is something you want more of, subscribe. There are more letters, more books, more stories to cover. We are just getting started. Now, back to the letter. Because the author of Hebrews is about to introduce the strangest figure in the entire Old Testament, a man who appears in Genesis for 2 verses and is never seen again, a man with no birth, no death, no genealogy, no tribe, no record of beginning or end. And the author is going to argue that this man, mysterious, ancient, almost ghostly figure, is the key to understanding everything Jesus came to do. His name is Melchizedek, and once you understand why he matters, you will never read Hebrews the same way again. Genesis chapter 14, verse 18. Abraham is returning from battle. He has just defeated 4 kings with 318 men. A number so specific it has the feeling of a real memory. Someone who was there and counted. And as he comes back through the valley, a man walks out to meet him. His name is Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of God Most High. He brings bread and wine. He blesses Abraham. And Abraham, the father of the faith, the man to whom God made the original covenant, the man whose name means father of many nations. Abraham gives him 1/10 of everything, a tithe, to this stranger, this king priest from a city whose name means peace. And then Melchizedek walks back into the text and disappears. 2 verses. No introduction, no exit, no mention of his parents, no record of his birth, no account of his death. The most important genealogies in the ancient world were the ones that traced your priestly lineage. You could not serve at the altar unless you could prove your bloodline back through Aaron, back through Levi, back through Jacob. Without a genealogy, you were nothing. Without a recorded death, you were nobody. Melchizedek has neither. And the author of Hebrews looks at that silence, that strange, deliberate, 1,000-year-old silence in the text, and says, pay attention to this. The silence is not an accident. The silence is the argument. A priest with no recorded beginning and no recorded end prefigures a priest whose priesthood has no beginning and no end. Not a priest who serves by the law of a physical requirement, by bloodline, by tribe, by the accident of birth, but a priest who serves by the power of an indestructible life. That phrase, the power of an indestructible life, is one of the extraordinary phrases in the New Testament. Read it slowly. The power of an indestructible life, not an undying life, as if death simply could not catch him. And indestructible life, as if death tried and found nothing in him that it could destroy. This is the priesthood of Jesus, not inherited, not temporary, not dependent on a bloodline that could be traced back through the right tribe. A priesthood that exists because the one who holds it cannot die. A priesthood that does not rotate, does not retire, does not end when the priest grows old or gets sick or makes a mistake. The author reaches back to Psalm 110, the most quoted psalm in the entire New Testament, and pulls out a single line the original readers would have known by heart. You are a priest forever, in the order of Melchizedek, forever, not for a generation, not for a season, not until the next high priest is appointed, forever. But it gets stranger, because the author's argument about Melchizedek is not just about the nature of Jesus' priesthood. It is about what that priesthood replaces. And here is where you need to understand what the Levitical system actually was, what it looked like, what it felt like, what it meant to walk into the temple courts on the Day of Atonement and watch the high priest do what no one else was permitted to do. Once a year, just once, the high priest would leave the outer courts, pass through the great curtain, and enter the Holy of Holies, the innermost chamber of the temple, the place where the presence of God was understood to dwell above the mercy seat, between the wings of the cherubim. He would not go in empty-handed. He would carry blood, the blood of a bull, sacrificed for his own sins first, and then the blood of a goat, sacrificed for the sins of the people. He would sprinkle the blood. He would come back out, and the people would wait. If the priest came back out alive, the atonement had been accepted. The sins of the nation were covered for another year, until next year when the whole thing would happen again, and the year after that, and the year after that. For generation after generation, the blood of animals covering sin the way a blanket covers a wound, not healing it, not removing it, just covering it. The author of Hebrews looks at that system and does not despise it. He does not call it wrong. He calls it what it is, a shadow. The law is only a shadow of the good things that are coming, not the realities themselves. For this reason, it can never, by the same sacrifices repeated endlessly year after year, make perfect those who draw near to worship. Think about what a shadow is. A shadow is real. A shadow is caused by something. Where there is a shadow, there is always a substance casting it. You cannot have a shadow without a reality behind it. The shadow of a man is not the man, but it tells you a man is there, and it tells you something about his shape, and it points in his direction. The entire sacrificial system, the altar, the priesthood, the blood, the Day of Atonement, the Holy of Holies, was a shadow, a true shadow, a God-ordained shadow, but a shadow, and then the substance arrived. Here is where the Greek word matters, the word kathizo. It means simply, he sat down. Hebrews 10, verse 12. But when this priest had offered for all time one sacrifice for sins, he sat down at the right hand of God. He sat down. Every other priest in the history of Israel stood. They stood because they were not finished. There was always another sacrifice to make, another year to wait for, another Day of Atonement coming. The standing was not ceremony. The standing was the proof that the work was incomplete. Jesus sat down, not because he was tired, because it was over. Completely, permanently, once for all. And that phrase in Greek, ephapax, carries the weight of a door that has been shut and will not need to be opened again. Not because what is behind it is locked away, but because the work that needed to be done there is finished. Day after day, every priest stands and performs his religious duties. Again and again, he offers the same sacrifices, which can never take away sins. But when this priest had offered for all time one sacrifice for sins, he sat down. Standing, sitting. That is the whole argument in two postures. And then, right in the middle of this unbroken theological case, right when you might expect the author to keep pressing the argument forward, he stops and he gets pastoral. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are. Yet he did not sin. Let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. Hebrews 4, verses 15 and 16, and this may be the most important pastoral statement in the entire letter. The author has just spent chapters arguing that Jesus is greater than angels, greater than Moses, greater than the entire Levitical priesthood. He has made the case that Jesus occupies a position no human priest has ever occupied, that his sacrifice accomplished what 10,000 animal sacrifices could not, that he sits at the right hand of God in permanent, unrepeatable victory. And now he says, and he knows what you are feeling right now, he was tempted in every way, just as you are. The Greek word for empathize here is sympathesai, to suffer alongside, not to observe from a distance, not to understand theoretically, to have been there, to have felt the hunger and the rejection and the weight of the dark hours and the silence of God and the exhaustion of doing what is right when everything in you wants to stop. He has felt what you feel, so come, not when you are ready, not when you have cleaned yourself up, not when the doubt is gone and the fire is back and you feel worthy of the throne room. Now, in the weakness, in the tiredness, in the quiet crisis that nobody else knows about, come to the throne of grace and you will find not judgment, not disappointment, not a high priest who looks at your exhaustion with contempt. You will find mercy and grace to help in your time of need. In Greek, timely help, help that arrives at exactly the right moment, not early, not late. The help that comes when you are at mile 22 and the legs have stopped working, and the only thing left is the choice to take one more step. The anchor holds not because you are strong enough to hold it. It holds because the forerunner has already gone in ahead of you. The word the author uses in Hebrews 6 verse 20 is prodromos, a word from the ancient world of sailing. The prodromos was the small scout boat that entered the harbor first when the water was too shallow for the main vessel. It would go in, drop anchor, and then the larger ship would be pulled into harbor by the line connecting it to the anchor already set. Jesus has gone in ahead, into the very presence of God, into the Holy of Holies that the high priest entered once a year with blood that was never enough. Jesus has entered once with his own blood, and he has set the anchor. And the anchor holds not because of anything you have done or failed to do. It holds because of who is holding the other end. We have this hope as an anchor for the soul, firm and secure. Not firm if you feel it, not secure if you can find it. Firm and secure, full stop, because the one who said it cannot fail and cannot lie and cannot be moved. There is a chapter in this letter that people have been reading at funeral saws for 2,000 years. Not because it is about death, because it is about something stronger than death, because it takes the longest view of faith that the New Testament ever attempts. Longer than any single gospel, longer than any letter Paul wrote, and it holds that view steady for 39 verses without flinching. It is Hebrews 11. And before you hear it, you need to understand what the author is doing. He has spent 10 chapters building his theological case. Jesus greater than angels, Jesus greater than Moses. The shadow and the substance, the priesthood that does not end, the sacrifice that does not repeat, the anchor that does not slip. And now he turns to his readers, these exhausted, pressured, nearly done people, and he says, "You are not the first to be tired, not the first to hold on in the dark, not the first to walk toward a promise you could not yet see, in a direction that made no sense to the people watching, at a cost that seemed far too high for something you could not hold in your hands. You are not the first." And here's the part nobody tells you. Every single person in this chapter died without receiving the promise. Everyone. Abel, murdered by his own brother before his life had barely begun. Enoch, taken by God in a generation so corrupt the author of Genesis cannot find words adequate to describe it. Noah, who built an ark in a landlocked place for a flood that had never happened before, while his neighbors watched and laughed and then drowned. Abraham, who left everything he knew for a land he had never seen, who waited 25 years for a son, who was then asked to give that son back, who died in a tent on land that was promised to him but never legally his. Sarah, who laughed at the promise because she was 90 years old and the promise was impossible, and then stopped laughing and believed anyway, and held a baby in arms that should have been too old to hold one. Moses, who spent 40 years in a wilderness preparing for a mission he did not know was coming, who stood before the most powerful ruler in the ancient world and said, "Let my people go," who led 2 million people through a sea that split open under his staff, who climbed a mountain and spoke with God face to face, and who died on the wrong side of the Jordan River, looking at the promised land from a distance, never setting foot in it. Rahab, a woman in a city marked for destruction, who hid 2 strangers on her roof because something in her recognized that their God was real, who tied a scarlet thread in her window and trusted that it would be enough. A woman with no standing, no lineage, no claim on any covenant, who ends up in this chapter alongside Abraham and Moses. The author does not have time for all of them. And what more shall I say? I do not have time to tell about Gideon, Barak, Samson, and Jephthah, about David and Samuel and the prophets, who, through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, shut the mouths of lions, quenched the fury of the flames, and escaped the edge of the sword. And then the register shifts. Others were tortured, refusing to be released so that they might gain an even better resurrection. Some faced jeers and flogging, and even chains and imprisonment. They were put to death by stoning. They were sawed in 2. They were killed by the sword. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins, destitute, persecuted, and mistreated, people of whom the world was not worthy. The author is not describing ancient history to his readers. He is describing their present tense, the people being tortured and imprisoned and killed. Some of them are people the recipients know. Some of them are people they have already buried. And here is the devastating and beautiful thing the author says about all of them. They did not receive the promise. They did not see the fulfillment. They did not hold what their faith was reaching for. They did not live to watch what their endurance made possible. These were all commended for their faith, yet none of them received what had been promised, since God had planned something better for us, so that only together with us would they be made perfect, together with us. They were running the first legs of a relay race that would not be finished until the last runner crossed the line. Abel and Enoch and Noah and Abraham and Sarah and Moses and Rahab. They were not failures who died before the finish. They were the ones who ran their leg, passed the baton, and now watch from the stands to see how the rest of the race goes. They are watching how you run. This is not a metaphor the author is being casual about. When he opens chapter 12, immediately after the Hall of Faith, without pausing, without a chapter break in the original text, he says, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses," the word for witnesses is martyrs. You know that word. It is where we get the English word martyr. But in the first century, it did not yet primarily mean someone who dies for their faith. It meant someone who testifies, someone who has given evidence, someone who has stood up and said, "This is what I saw, this is what I know, this is what I staked my life on." The cloud of witnesses is not a passive audience in a heavenly grandstand watching with mild interest. They are witnesses in the legal sense. People whose testimony is on record. People whose lives constitute evidence that the faith is real and the promise is true and the finish line exists even when you cannot see it. They ran. Now it is your turn. Therefore, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. And let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. The pioneer. The Greek word is archegos, the one who goes first, the one who opens the path, the one who blazes the trail that others will follow. He did not send us into something he had not already entered. He did not call us to a race he had not already run. He ran it first. And here is what his race looked like. Who, for the joy set before him, endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God, for the joy set before him. He could see the finish line. He could see what was on the other side of the cross. Not just his own resurrection, but every person who would ever be brought home through it, every prodigal who would ever turn back, every drifter who would ever stop drifting, every nearly done person who would read a letter with no name on it in a dim room in a dangerous city and decide to hold on one more day. He endured the cross for the joy of that, and he sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. And then the author says, feel the weight of why he says it right here, right after the hall of faith and the cloud of witnesses and the image of Jesus sitting at the finish line. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. Consider him. Not consider your circumstances, not consider your progress, not consider how far you have come or how far you still have to go, or whether the people around you are still running or have already stopped. Consider him. There is a woman somewhere, in Rome, in Jerusalem, in a city whose name history has forgotten, who is at mile 22. You know what mile 22 feels like. You may be there right now. The race is not in doubt. She has trained, she has run, she knows the finish line exists, but the body has made its decision, and the decision is no more. The only thing still moving is something deeper than muscle, something that was placed in her at the beginning of the race that has nothing to do with how she feels today and everything to do with what she fixed her eyes on when she started. She is not thinking about her training. She is not remembering her best times. She is thinking about one thing. The pioneer has already finished this race. He is at the finish line. He ran it with a cross on his back and nails in his hands and the full weight of every sin ever committed, pressing down on a frame that was also fully human. And he finished. And he sat down. And he is watching her run mile 22. And he is not shaking his head at how slow she is going. He is not checking his watch. He is not comparing her to the runners who finished or the runners who stopped at mile 18. He is the pioneer. And pioneers do not abandon the people following their trail. This is not a story about performance. This is not a story about whether you have enough faith or enough stamina or enough theological clarity to cross the finish line. This is not a story about the runners who were faster or stronger or less tired than you. This is a story about a pioneer who has gone in ahead, who has set the anchor, who has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God, who has opened the way into the Holy of Holies through his own blood, who has become a high priest, who knows exactly what mile 22 feels like from the inside, and who is watching you run it. Now, we need to talk about those 4 words. Do not grow weary. That is it. That is the 4 words. Not a doctrine, not a command with conditions attached, not a theological proposition that requires 3 commentaries and a working knowledge of Greek to unpack. Just 4 words, written by someone who knew in the way that only a person who has sat with exhausted people knows, that the most dangerous moment in the life of faith is not the dramatic crisis. It is the Tuesday afternoon when nothing dramatic is happening at all. When the fire is low and the prayers feel like they are bouncing off the ceiling and the people who used to run alongside you are no longer there, and you cannot remember the last time faith felt like joy instead of obligation. When you are not in danger of a spectacular fall, you are in danger of something quieter and in some ways more final. You are in danger of just stopping. The author of Hebrews knows this. He has known it from the first line. Every argument he has built, the angels, Moses, the priesthood, the shadow and the substance, the anchor, the hall of faith, the cloud of witnesses, the pioneer sitting at the right hand of God. Every single piece of this letter has been constructed for this moment, not to impress you with theology, to keep you running. And here is what I want you to hear, really hear, not just process as information about those 4 words. They come after everything. After the most careful theological argument in the New Testament, after 28 chapters of precise, historically rooted, scripturally dense reasoning, after Abel and Enoch and Noah and Abraham and Sarah and Moses and Rahab and the unnamed ones who were sawed in 2 and went about in sheepskins and died without seeing the promise. After all of it, the author does not end with a doctrine. He ends with a plea. Do not grow weary. That is the sound of someone who loves the people he is writing to. Not a scholar closing an argument. A pastor grabbing the arm of someone who is about to walk away and saying, not yet, stay. And this is where I want to leave you with 3 things. The first is this: Hebrews is not a cold book. I know it has a reputation for being dense and difficult and intimidating. The kind of letter you skip on your way to something more accessible, but the density is not academic. Every comparison the author makes, every time he says Jesus is better. Better than angels, better than Moses, better than the priesthood, better than the sacrifices. He is not writing a theology exam. He is answering a question that real people in real danger were asking with everything they had. Is he worth it? And the author's answer on every page, in every argument, is yes. Not a quiet yes, not a theoretical yes. A yes that has been tested against the full weight of Jewish history and Roman persecution, and the specific, particular exhaustion of people who have already given a great deal and are being asked to give more. Yes, he is worth it. Here is why. Here is the evidence. Here is the case. Now hold on. The second thing is this: the warning passages in Hebrews, and there are 5 of them, and they are severe, and generations of readers have been frightened by them. The warning passages are not there to push you off the edge. They are there because the author can see how close to the edge you are. There is a difference between a warning sign at the top of a cliff and a hand pushing you toward it. The author is not pushing. He is warning. He is saying, I can see what is happening, and I am not going to pretend it is fine, and I am not going to give you easy comfort that will dissolve the moment you walk back out into the world that is trying to undo you. I am going to tell you the truth. The drift is real, the danger is real, and the way back, the throne of grace, the high priest who empathizes, the anchor that holds, is also real. Come, not when you are ready, not when you are stronger, now, as you are, with the doubt and the tiredness, and the 15 years of accumulated cost, and the question you have not said out loud to anyone. Come. And the third thing, the one I want to still be with you at 2 in the morning when everything else has gone quiet. Somewhere in Hebrews 11, there is a name that was never written down. The author ran out of time. He said so himself. I do not have time to tell about all of them. And so there are people in that chapter who are present but unnamed. People who conquered kingdoms and administered justice and shut the mouths of lions and quenched the fury of flames. People who were tortured and imprisoned and sawed in two and went about in sheepskins, destitute and persecuted. People of whom the world was not worthy. They are in the cloud, and so are the ones who came after them. The ones who held on in centuries the author could not see, in languages he never spoke, in cities that did not yet exist, under pressures he could not have imagined. People who ran their leg of the race in obscurity, whose names are not in any text, whose faith will not be recognized until everything hidden is revealed. You may be one of them. Your name may not be written in any record that survives. Your struggle may not be visible to anyone around you. The leg of the race you are running may feel so quiet and so small and so far from the dramatic faith of the hall of faith that you wonder whether you are even in the same race. You are. You are in the cloud. The ones who went before you, Abel and Enoch, and Noah and Abraham and Sarah and Moses and Rahab, and the unnamed ones who wore sheepskins, and the ones who held on in every generation between then and now, they are witnesses. Their lives are testimony. And their testimony is this: the promise is real. The pioneer has finished the race. The anchor holds. Keep running. Which part of Hebrews speaks to where you are right now? The high priest who understands your weakness. The once-for-all sacrifice that means it is finished. The hall of faith, and the people who held on without seeing the promise, or just those 4 words. Do not grow weary. Tell me below. I read every comment. The door is still open. The race is still yours. And the